the eternal, omnipresent, omnipotent, omnibenevolent.
Okay. So by definition, God can do whatever the hell he wants without any waiving of physics, so I have to automatically assume that if I accept the definition of God by being defined as being able to do whatever he wants, can he do whatever he wants? Well, I must concede that if a God exists that can do anything he wants, then I must concede that by definition he can do whatever he wants. But you still do not know, because you do not have verifiable knowledge that such a being exists. So when you assert that you know that which you in fact only believe, you are making a dishonest misrepresentation. Despite your level of delusion / conviction, it is still a dishonest misrepresentation. It would be more obvious or more honest, infinitely so, if you would preface your assertions with the term, I believe.
But you are the ones. I mean, for example, when we were talking about what is the first axiom of logic, or where do we begin our assessment of reality, you start with the universe. That's where you began your entire assessment of
universe. Does anyone not start there? Does anyone not start yet with reality?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
Do you actually start with the assumption that God exists before you've even made any observations that you yourself exist, or
hold
that
on,
the
you're
universe
talking in
exists?
chronological order.
How else do you build hierarchical models?
No. I mean, obviously, I came into the world, and the first thing that I was aware of was the room I was in, and on it goes. And I mean, you all know about the development of children and how they. So in that chronological sense, that's not what I'm talking about.
Children and how they have imaginary friends that they talk to.
Sure.
And most people grow out of that. Unfortunately, you have not. You still have your
that's the thing. I was an atheist for a long time, and now I believe in God, which seems to suggest, and this is not rare by any means, God is something fundamentally different than imaginary friends. But that aside, my point is...
How is he different?
Because he's real.
He's not real, because you can't prove it. I'm sorry.
Hold on.
Is that all right if I say something? Because we're coming towards the end of the show. We will have you back on the next show if you really want to try and continue this argument. You do not have evidence. If you had evidence, then you would be able to convince us. We are not irrational people. We would accept evidence. All you are saying is a statement of belief. And at this point, because it's now 10 past, I'm sorry. I'm going to end the call. But please feel free to come back on a future show. We'd welcome you. But we are running out of time.
Gentlemen, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Look forward to having you on the show again. I'm sorry to have cut it short, but it's 10 past 10, and also I've got to get some food I've not eaten today, and I'm absolutely starving. So normally we would overrun by another 10 minutes or so. I apologize.
I was about to say, so because you couldn't stave off your hunger pangs for another 10 minutes, we all have to end the show.
Well, do you want to bring it back? I'll just go and get my food and let the show continue if you want. Should we bring him back? If you want to, we'll bring him back, but I won't be here.
Okay. I want to apologize to everyone. When we get somebody like that that's on the show, it is possible to reason with them, but only if you're systematic, and you have to be one at a time. And if this is the problem we had when...
Bring him back, Thunder.
Well, 2 weeks ago when we had that other guy on, and Thunder and I are stomping on each other trying to figure out which one is going to get to this guy, and we're both arguing different points. He takes that to his advantage and comes away not having learned anything from either of us. I love to have people like this and converse with them one-on-one and see where we can get somewhere.
Can I say something? If that's all right, I don't mean to interrupt you.
I'm sorry, I'm just being a jerk. Go ahead, please.
No, it's fine. I wouldn't have even conceded, when he talked about the existence of his God, I would have made him specify by what he means existence. Because when I talk about, and you talk about existence, and we all talk about existence, like, for instance, this computer in front of me, it's physical. When we talk about existence, since the only thing we know is physical input into our physical brains, what does he mean by physical? I wouldn't have let him even get that far as ontology, the ontos. I would have made him explain what he means by his God exists. Because I can explain how this computer exists and even how it works. Yes?
I think I'm back.
So that's...
But do you know...
Yes, I do.
So that's what I would like to hear from venomfangx is what he means by his God exists. I know this computer exists, But what would you mean by, for instance, an immaterial being like a soul or whatever? How does that work, and does it have mechanisms by which it works?
Sure. I think that's that's a fine question. I would say there are degrees of existence. For example, I think what is eternal has a certain hierarchy or a higher rank of what we would call existence than that which is temporary. For like any of us, I think we could pass out of existence, whereas something that is eternal cannot. And I would suggest God is ontologically eternal. So in that sense, he exists in a greater degree than anything else. As far as mechanisms, I know you're asking a different question. As far as mechanisms go, God is a fundamentally simple being. He is essentially a disembodied mind, just a pure.
Now, how do you know that?
Well,
just because I know him.
Actually, the whole. I think I can summarize this sort of shell game very adequately, and I know something to be true as well, Sean. That the magic sandwich is a disembodied mind, and your God wouldn't be possible for your God to be omnipotent without something that is transomnipotent. And so it's the magic sandwich that creates your God with the ability to create you to know that it exists, right?
Now,
and this is how,
you use this argument.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
Your God manifested himself as a human. The magic sandwich has manifested itself as this rock, and that's how you know that it's all powerful, because it has the humility to manifest itself not as a primate, but as an inanimate object. And I know that to be true. There is no way that you can explain the omnipotence of your God without this rock.
All right, well, here's the flaw in your argument. What you're trying to use, and you used this last time I was on the show, you're trying to use the problem of the infinite regression against God. You're saying, well, there's a God above God. Well, then, you could also posit a God above that God, and then a God above that God, and you can go infinitely into the past, and you would suggest that
it's a shell game, and you've done that. You've just done stage one. You've done stage one on the shell game. I just did exactly the same thing.
Here's the problem. Okay, here's the problem. I often use the argument you're making for evidence for the existence of God by suggesting that we cannot infinitely regress into the past, and we must terminate in a first cause that itself is independent, uncontingent, and not dependent upon something that came before it. And what you're saying is God is also subject to regression, that something may have come before him, and then something before the cause of God, and then something before the cause that caused God.
That's not the problem. The problem is that you're proposing explanations that have no utility. I mean, if you don't know why the universe exists, saying that God created it is no more a satisfactory explanation than me proposing that a magic sandwich created your God, right? Both are just assertions that have no utility whatsoever. The bottom line is we don't know why
that they can't be true.
We don't know why the universe exists.
I do.
It is. No, and I know why your God exists, Sean, and it's because of the magic sandwich. I know it.
But my God,
it's true.
But God is a uncontingent being. He couldn't be caused.
Actually, no. The fact that you can get an uncontingent being is proof that the magic sandwich exists.
But then the magic sandwich would be God.
No, because only an uncontingent being could create an uncontingent being.
But an uncontingent being, that's essentially that's redundant. That doesn't even make sense.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is basically asserting something to cover. It's an argument from ignorance. You don't know why the universe exists.
What you've done is
you just assert something.
Thunderfoot, you've demonstrated necessity for God's existence. You've shown it through an infinite regression problem. We cannot infinitely regress into the past. You've just demonstrated that.
venomfangx, I would like to.
And I'm sorry, I should let James go ahead. James, go ahead.
I've already dealt with this argument in his video about infinite regression. You see, the problem is that he has the problem of infinite regression because he has a God who existed from eternity, who never said at any time, because there was no time apparently, said that I know I'm going to create a universe. He'd always said this. There never was a time when he didn't. But somehow he still arrived at this stage where he brought something without a platform for sequential causation. There was no time and space before the Big Bang.
Correct.
So how did he bring anything to existence? I mean, you agree, Thunderfoot, that you can't bring something from nothing, but then you have a God who's supposedly bringing something from nothing, and you have a God who's in his God bubble of time. I don't know what else to call it because,
Well, there is no time for God, but yes.
But I'm just using that as a word. It's not really time as we mean time. So you have a God who infinitely says into the past that
he doesn't infinitely say into the past. There is no past or future.
I'm saying
for God.
all thoughts. Listen to me. I used to do theology. I understand what your argument
not
is here.
Understand God's thoughts and actions are eternal.
You're not listening. You let me finish.
Go ahead.
All thoughts are before him at the same time. There's never been nothing has ever occurred to God like you said in your video. I agree with that. Okay, if your God postulation is going to be orthodox, that's true. But you still have the problem because there still had to arrive at this point, whether you want to call time or not, when he actually creates the universe.
False,
but
because God's eternal. Because God's actions are done in eternity and they affect in time. The creation of time is an expression of God's activity in eternity. And that's true.
Okay, so let me ask a question. Is it not possible for any entity to leave the confines of this universe by whatever means, either to go to a different universe or just regardless go out of the boundaries of this one?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And such a being, if could leave, possibly could come back?
I believe that, yes.
Okay. So you said that a non-eternal thing could never fade out of existence. But if you leave this universe, you leave the boundaries of this universe, you no longer exist in this universe, right?
I would suggest that would be transcending dimensions, but I'll
also render one eternal, in a sense, right?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that there can be different space-times that are each distinct or unique to themselves.
So if you step out in a TARDIS, for example, and you leave the confines of this universe,
right,
and you can return to the confines of this universe at any point in time because you're now
conceivably,
outside.
Yes.
Then that would render you eternal, yes?
No. Eternal means you always were and always will be. But I
not
think
if you fade out of existence. If an eternal being then it leaves the boundaries of this universe and it ceases to exist in this universe, right?
I don't believe, because there's only one eternal being, and that is God.
How do you know that? How many universes do we have? This is a problem with talking about religious people. I mean, because you just make up stuff and call it.
No. I'm not. I can.
If I go grab some Hindu over there who will tell me that he knows that Krishna is true and he knows it just as much as you know your God is true, and then I can get somebody from the Orient and they know that their God is true, but it's all a delusion. Do you accept that their God is a delusion? Do you accept that George Harrison was not really experiencing Krishna? Do you accept that regardless of his high level of confidence and his firm conviction that he was seeing and hearing the God with which he had a personal relationship, that he was in fact deluded?
Actually, no, because I believe that Krishna or Buddha, I believe these were actual figures in history. I truly believe that Muhammad met an angel. I truly believe that these...
Do you accept Krishna, who existed on the earth centuries before Jesus, and who, unlike Jesus, declared himself to be God in the flesh, and declared that he made not only this universe, but not only this world, but this universe, and not just this universe, but he made the multiverse? You accept that Krishna, who took sole credit for the creation of the universe, and that all other gods, Krishna said, emanate from him. You accept that Krishna exists?
I'm saying that I think it's a demon. I think it was an actual supernatural phenomenon.
You accept that. Okay, so now you're telling me that
I don't believe what Krishna said, if that's what you're asking.
George Harrison was experiencing a demon and not Krishna. Is that right?
What I'm saying is Krishna is a demon.
Okay, so you're telling me that George Harrison was experiencing a demon and not Krishna, right?
Well, Krishna, if Krishna is a demon, then he would be experiencing Krishna, who is a
Then
demon.
George Harrison was deluded, and I was correct.
No, he wasn't deluded.
Was deluded by a
Hold
demon.
on, whoa,
It doesn't
Aaron.
matter.
Aaron,
whether
that's
it's a
not
chemical
delusion.
imbalance, whether it's LSD, whether
That's
it's
not
the
delusion.
malformation of your brain that you may never experience. Why you're deluded, it is a delusion. Do you
Sir.
get that?
With all due respect, that's not a delusion.
Would somebody please tell this boy what a delusion is?
Can I ask you questions about your God? Because I'm kind of interested. You said he existed before no time. There was no time.
Can I first just address what Aaron said, please?
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to make a distinction between delusion and deception. There is a difference.
And
the difference,
is?
Well, the difference is this. If a demon appears to me claiming to be God, but is not in fact God, well, I'm not deluded about his appearing to me. I'm actually having a interaction with this being. He's deceived me into believing certain things about him that are not true, but the interaction itself is not itself a delusion.
So you
But
could
you have to
be
concentrate
so Sean.
Wait. There is delusion here. Because how does George Harrison, or did George Harrison, encounter Krishna? Because it wasn't that just Krishna just appeared, uninvited. There were methods that he had to go through in order to do this. He had to concentrate. He had to chant the mantras. He had to meditate. He had to evoke faith. And only extreme faith could he receive these manifestations and revelations.
Correct. And it sounds very much like the occult and what they do with Ouija boards and the demonic.
And
No, no, Aaron, here's the
You
difference.
mean like
between you and me.
speaking in tongues, for instance?
I'm not a tongue speaker myself, so yes, I think that's also a manifestation of the demonic, at least within the Pentecostal.
But I mean, it really cuts down to you accept that people can be completely misguided.
I believe you guys in this room are completely misguided, so yes.
Right. Okay. So the question comes: is there a method by which you can actually distinguish whether you are actually misguided or not? In other words, how do you know you're not the guy being deceived by the demon, and they're the actual ones praising the one true God? How do you know this?
Okay, that's a fine question. It's because
John, let me help you with something, John. The way that you avoid this level of deception is not to buy into it, to accept that you might be deluded. This is what I do. See, I accept that I could be mistaken. I do not assert absolute truth. I do not feign knowledge of things I don't really know. And
wait, Aaron,
Yes.
then that means it's possible within your frame of thinking that I'm right.
Is it possible that a God exists? Yes. Is it possible that you're right? No. There's a huge distinction there. Because you said things that are wrong.
Such as?
That are wrong. You always say things that are wrong. Your videos
give me an example.
With wrong. Fractal wrongness. No, it is not possible that you are right. If God exists, he would bitch slap you for being so wrong all the time.
About what? Okay, an example would be very appreciated.
Well,
assertion of knowledge that you don't have would be one.
How obvious do you need to be? You are taking lies from someone in prison for lying and rehashing those lies without examination and then perpetuating them even when you know they are wrong. That's
We're talking about evolution now, right?
Then you're stating as fact that which is not evidently true. This again is dishonest. You are feigning knowledge no one can even know.
How do you know that I can't know God?
Absolutely.
How do you know that?
Because you did it on the show just now.
No. How do you know that in my own personal whatever that I don't know God? How do you know that?
Because you can't.
Well, for the same reason that you know that George Harrison didn't know Krishna.
Because we've already established, by definition, knowledge is verifiable. If it's not verifiable, it isn't knowledge.
Right, well, God is verified to me as far as I'm
concerned. If you can't show it, then you don't know it.
And Krishna was verified to George Harrison.
Okay, but hold on. Just because I can't verify it to you to your satisfaction does not mean that what I know is not true. I mean, I can think of many examples of that.
Sean, you can say everything that you say about your God and just put blah there. You don't have to use the word God.
You're right.
Said he exists.
The word God is an English word.
You said he's not material. right?
Correct.
And you can't tell me what that is, except that it's what it's not, right? Now, you can't tell me, first of all, you say that he created causation, a platform for causation. How could he cause anything before there was a causation, a platform for sequential causation? How
because
could he do
God
that?
is the eternal cause himself.
Let me finish. Okay.
Assertion.
So you're saying that he existed no time, which he existed no time. You're saying he existed before space, which means he existed no place.
No.
God does not exist.
Hold on. Existing without space, I think we need to rephrase that. God transcends space altogether. Before he created anything, he was all that existed, which means that all
And
of
this
reality,
rock
all that reality
transcends
was God.
Okay, so then where did all this come from then? Did he just go poof and it just came out of nowhere? Or is it a part of himself? Are we talking pantheism? He spoke it into existence. So where did that, so look, we're a part of God? He pulled something out of himself? Where did he get this material
that's not
from?
creation ex nihilo, no.
Okay, so how is that even logically possible to create something ex nihilo? And if you can't explain that, how do you expect anyone to buy that? How do you call that logical?
Because I can't explain everything doesn't mean it's not true.
Just because you first explain anything, A-N-Y, you can't explain anything.
There's fundamentally no difference between what you're saying and me just making up something. Like when I was debating Matt Slick and he said there's a soul, and I asked him to define it, and he said, well, it is that thing, that immaterial consciousness apart from the physical body. That is
May I suggest that using simple things that we know about the universe, that the fact that we can't infinitely regress into the past, that matter, time, and space must have come into existence. They're not eternal. On that basis alone, we know that
it's an unknown, Sean.
No, it's not an unknown.
Yes, it is.
Even agree
No,
on
you've
that.
constructed a model of the universe that involves things like logic, causality, and so on. You have then made extrapolations from that model. Now, the thing about extrapolations from models is the longer you extrapolate them, the less reliable they come. And when you're extrapolating things to the beginning of the universe, it is likely that those extrapolations will become very poor. Just like when you get close to the speed of light, Newtonian assumptions become very poor.
You've already
so it is likely that the models that you've constructed and now are making the longest extrapolation that you can possibly make are inappropriate. They are unlikely to yield correct results.
Yes.
You've already. What I'm doing is sort of like trigonometry. I'm taking two or more points of reference and saying that based on these numerous factors, that God is the best explanation for the creation. No. I used the argument of the infinite regression that you yourself used against me in the beginning of this conversation.
It does not explain anything. Sean, when you say God did it, you may as well say, I don't know how it happened, must have been magic. Either phrase does not explain anything.
I've heard that before, and I couldn't disagree more. I came home one day and my room was clean, and I asked my sister, how did it get clean? And she said, my mom did. Well, that's not an explanation. What is this nonsense that my mom cleaned my room? I mean,
you're comparing it with a physical. She's physical. You cannot compare a physical object which you can taste, touch, experience with a blah.
Now, let me interject here because the example is fairly clear in this case. That when you say that you didn't see your mum clean the room, but you have a track record, you are using inductive reasoning to infer that your mum cleaned the room. Now, if you were to say I came back and my room was clean, therefore the devil did it, I would probably take issue with that.
And in this case, I tend to agree with you.
Right. So the thing is that unless you have a track record of God's creating universes, asserting that God created the universe is not a reasonable use of induction because there is no track record.
Well, you've pointed out something that I agree with and I think is quite valuable because we haven't seen the universe or multiple universes be created. As you say, in your opinion, it is an unknown. Well, if the creation of the universe, which essentially is the beginning of everything to us, you have a big hole in your entire worldview at essentially the most important point, which I think is the most perfect place to fit the Christian God. You have a big gate hole in your worldview. God fits in just fine.
Hold on a second. Now you're talking God of the gaps again. You get to that point where if you don't know, then you know.
No. I never said that, Aaron. I didn't say that's...
You don't get to feign knowledge no one can even know. If we have a point where we don't have an explanation for something, it doesn't mean that you do. It doesn't mean that it was magic. Because
that wasn't my argument.
Once upon a time, we didn't know what caused disease, and somebody said, well, and the explanation that was offered by the supernaturalists turned out to be wrong. The origin of the universe, like the origin of life, is also going to be another situation.
James, I think your microphone's causing quite a bit of static.
Yeah, I think James just had a plane flyover or something.
Yeah, there was a jet. Sorry.
So you've already allowed that certain things may or may not be able to come in through the boundaries of this universe.
Aaron, and with all due respect, I think you misunderstood what I was saying. With all due respect. All I was saying is that in Thunderfoot and all of your worldview, the unknown that you posit at the creation of the universe is a perfect place for what I'm telling you is true to fit. It's a possibility. And if you entertain that as a possibility...
Yeah, it's also possible this rock fits there, Sean.
Fair enough. Okay.
Try to understand this. I'm going to hit you with something. I want you to think about this for a moment, okay? You are arguing that although we can show for certain that we don't know exactly how the first life came about, but with all the evidence we've ever seen from any field indicates that life did not exist on this planet at one point, and then 3.5 billion years or so, there was life on this planet. We agree on that?
No, because I'm a young Earth creationist.
Of course not, because when we come to a point where we're talking about things that science still does not know, and you say it's a perfect place to fit in your God, you're basing that on a belief in a Tower of Babel, which we know did not actually happen the way the story described, and you're saying...
How do you know that?
The assumption of a flood that we know for absolutely certain did not happen the way the story
Disagree, but okay.
And we're talking about a dirt golem spell, which we know did not happen the way it was described in Genesis 2.
What? What are you talking about?
Dirt golems. Mud golems. The golem spell.
Oh, you're talking about the creation of Adam and Eve.
You make a clay figurine and you breathe into it the breath of life. Come on, you know the spell.
I see. You're just mocking me. Okay, well, I appreciate that, but we know as a fact that every element in our bodies is naturally found in the earth. So the idea that God brought the elements together and
we know.
So are you saying that we come from rocks, Sean?
We know for a fact that we are apes.
Are you?
Okay. So here's one fact that I can state that we know. Okay, we are apes. Yes, apes are constructed out of natural materials that exist naturally in the universe. We know also that at the time that your Tower of Babel was already being created, that multiple languages were already being spoken all the way around the world. We know
that's not true, actually.
But we do know that that's true. You have to deny reality to believe what you do, but that is true.
One example.
And that's
just
why
one.
it's possible that God could exist.
Chinese.
Still
okay, that's great. Let's use the Chinese as an example. I think
that's flood story was the one with the warrior that goes up in the top of the mountain in a rage because he lost a battle, so he hurls his spear into the firmament, which was the giant dome over the earth.
I'll make a deal with you guys.
Brought in a flood, and then because the world had flooded, the Naga goddess Nu Kwa had to come and clean up the water and mend the hole in the firmament. That's the one you're talking about, Sean?
Tell me something. If you can tell me the name, of one Chinese ruler 10,000 years ago, I'll concede your point.
Shurappak in 2900 BC. Is that the one you're talking about, Sean?
There is no reason to believe these stories are as old as you're telling me.
Had survivors climbing to the hilltops to get away. See, none of the flood myths match, Sean. If you go to the Americas, then you have one surviving couple, no animals or anything, just one surviving couple, and they survive in a seashell. All the flood myths are discordant, except those that come from Akkad, Sumer, and Babylon, and that's because they're all based on the same event, the flood of Shurappak in 2900 BC, at which time we already had native tribes living in Africa, in the Americas, in Australia. They were already speaking different languages. The cultures that are there now were there then. Your flood, global scale, did not happen, and not even proof of the existence of God can change that. If God exists, the Bible is still wrong. If your God exists, you are still wrong.
I understand that you believe everything that you're telling me, but I would suggest...
And prove it.
Okay, well, if you think you can prove it.
Everything that you have said has been an assertion, not in evidence. You have stated all kinds of things as if you knew things that no one even can know. That's why this conversation is empty. I can back up what I say, and you can't. And that's where it ends.
Well,
okay, I'm going to disagree with you.
I was wondering if I could ask Sean about his holy book here. And this is the second chapter of Matthew, and where supposedly where Jesus is fleeing with his father and his family into Egypt. And it says, and it's quoting from, I believe it is Hosea. Malachi, or Hosea, you're right. It's quoting from Hosea, and it's saying that out of Egypt I have called my son. Now, first of all,
that's an Old Testament reference to the nation of Israel. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Okay, so this is obviously talking about Joseph, or Jacob, it says in the ESV translation. And also, if you'll note that in the same chapter, it says that, and he will be called a Nazarene. I was wondering if you could locate that verse in the Tanakh for me?
Sure. What the New Testament authors were doing was they were alluding to the fact, Jesus said that all of Scripture testifies of me. So in this particular case, we see that Jesus is prefigured in the patriarchs and in the nation of Israel, and I can give you various examples of that. Now, a Nazarite, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, was raised in Galilee. So let me actually just pull up my notes here on this. This actually has come up quite a few times. It isn't an exact verse. It says that a Nazarite means, literally translated, a branch, or a Nazarene. So it says let me pull up the exact verse. It says that he will be a branch or an offshoot of the tribe of Jesse, which is the father of King David. And it also says in Isaiah 53, the most famous passage about Jesus, that he was a root out of dry ground and a branch in a parched land. That's that sort of language. So when it says he will be...
You realize that same passage also comes from the legends of Bacchus, right? Dionysus. The myths of Dionysus use that same line.
Well, even if I only had Isaiah 53, verse 8 mistranslates in your Christian Bibles loamo, which is a third person plural, which is supposed to be translated them, and they translate it he, but that's besides the point. If you read the context, it clearly identifies before and after the suffering servant as either a woman, it's referring to Jeshurun, a righteous remnant of Israel. If you read the context, it reveals who the suffering servant is, and guess what? It does not say Yeshua. So if you read the context... It
clearly is Yeshua. I don't know how you could deny that.
No, it clearly isn't.
Read Isaiah 49 and 52. It says the suffering servant is the one who brings the salvation of the Jews to the Gentiles through his death and resurrection, and through him, who though he is rejected by his own people, he brings the rest of the world into the knowledge and worship.
It does not say anything about death and resurrection.
Sure it does. Isaiah 53. I'll read you the verse.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm pulling it up now. I could actually go get my dad's Tanakh when he was bar mitzvahed, and I could read it out of there.
Hebrew.
What's that?
I'll just pull up the original Hebrew.
Yeah, I could pull it up too, but for the hearers, I'll just read the English. It says right here, where does it talk about his grave? Hold on. So it's clearly he dies. Okay, he was assigned a grave with the wicked. That's Isaiah 53, verse 9. So he's in the grave. And then it says in verse number 11, it says, after he has suffered, he will see the light of life.
It also uses the word...
And he will prolong his days. So he dies, goes to the grave, and then he comes back from the dead.
You're skipping something. It also says that that he will have Zerah, which he does not have. And Zerah only ever refers to physical seed, and not referring to a spiritual type of descendant, but a physical. But in this one passage, I find it funny that you Christians interpret that as, oh no, it's a spiritual, he'll have spiritual descendants. They're talking about Christians that will come later.
Well, you have to understand that when Isaiah was writing this, he's writing this to the Jewish people who lived 600 years before Jesus. And so Isaiah 52, 53, 49, they actually apply to the nation of Israel corporately, as I was talking about before, as it says in Hosea that out of Egypt I have called my son, and it's referring only to the nation of Israel literally when Hosea was writing.
Okay,
then it has an application.
What you're doing is, Sean, is you're applying a double fulfillment.
Correct.
And if it wasn't so, you could not prove that. So all you're doing is resorting to faith. Well, it's a double fulfillment.
No. Hold on.
At the same time.
That's not how I'm arguing at all, because there are other places. You can't just use one verse and say this is the silver bullet that does it all. It says in many other places that the Messiah had to die and come back from the dead. It says that in it says it in the Psalms. It says it in Daniel chapter 9. And so what you do is you kind of, sorry?
Isaiah 53 is only one of 4 servant songs. And there are other places where they use, talking about Israel in the plural, use the same terminology, stricken, all these different things.
I agree with you.
Talking about that. So how can you say, other than just appealing to faith, which is not knowing, as Aaron Law has pointed out, it's wishful thinking or wishful
It's not wishful thinking. It's very evident in the text. I can give you an example that I like to bring up. Genesis, when you just read it plainly, it tells a narrative, but when you look more closely, what you see is that the story of Christ is told and retold over and over again in the book of Genesis to the purpose of revealing that God's entire plan culminates in the person of Christ.
I understand that that's how your 20th century's thick of Christian tradition interprets it, but you understand.
What I'm saying is there is no possible other. It's not even a matter of interpretation. It's actually just very obviously in the text.
I'm sorry, I have to disagree, and I think you're again.
Well, let me give you an example, and then you can disagree.
Well, let me ask you a question: Is Christ the once and for all sacrifice, as it says in Hebrew?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the last temple, is it going to have sacrifices?
There are sacrifices in the sense that they're like they were before. They're memorial and they're pictorial. They're not an actual covering for sin.
Oh, okay. So then some. So then, like, for instance, some Christians who translate the Bible as saying sin sacrifice in Zechariah, and it also says, by the way, that in this temple, no uncircumcised in flesh or in heart will enter the temple. So if Paul says that circumcision isn't necessary, but now this text is saying, clearly talking about the last temple, that no uncircumcised person will enter the temple, why is it that it says, it specifies in flesh?
Because the circumcision of the flesh is pictorial, again, of the truth of of the spiritual reality of what happens to a Christian when they are circumcised.
No. It says circumcised in heart and flesh. Why would it say
both? Talks about and it talks about in the New Covenant of Jeremiah that he takes away our heart of stone, gives us a heart of flesh, and right. The circumcision, the marking in the flesh, the removal of the foreskin is meant to be symbolic of the removing of the flesh and becoming more sensitive in the spirit. All that sort of. Paul
so then this passage should be read. We didn't really mean physically circumcised. You can really enter the temple. That's not really what we meant. We didn't mean a physical, because it does state that a physical, no one circumcised in flesh. So you're telling me that blatant statement right there needs to be interpreted another way? Is that your assertion?
Not necessarily. What exact verse is it? I'd like to have it before me before I actually make.
It's towards the end of Zechariah there.
Zechariah 14, where it talks about no more a Philistine.
Where I'm confusing probably with Ezekiel, because I know I have those two passages just stuck in my head. I know Ezekiel talks something about that as well.
All right. Well, there is a lot of talk in Isaiah. Maybe it's in Isaiah. There is a lot of talk about the third temple that is yet to be built.
Just for us who aren't Bible scholars, how does chopping off pieces of your dick actually make you close to God?
It doesn't, which is actually the point. So thanks, Thunderfoot.
And I actually had a question.
No. So why do they do it at all in the Bible?
It's a great question. Can I answer that with? Yeah, so Abraham was the first one given the thing of circumcision. It was to Abraham that he was given the promise that his seed would actually be the blessing to the world, the Messiah. So there was a mark in his reproductive organ that the Messiah would come through his seed. That itself was about Christ.
Did that actually answer the question? Why is it necessary to chop his foreskin off?
Well, yeah.
And why was it necessary for all of the Jews to chop their foreskins off? And why in this battle does David go out and collect, 200 foreskins
That's actually... I'm glad you bring that up too. So King Shaul, my Hebrew name is Shaul, King Saul was actually trying to get King David killed, so he sent him to get 4,000 or 5,000 foreskins from the Philistines. That was never commanded by God. It was commanded by King Saul, who was a madman. But
and now think about that the next time you guys buy a bag of pork rind chips. Just imagine, little deep fry. That's what it would look like.
I'm trying to eat here, Aaron.
I was about to say, yeah, but are you saying that it's just pure coincidence that God wants bits of the dick chopped off, and so does this mad king? Yeah.
What I'm saying is that God. I appreciate your sense of humor, but when King David was sent to do that, that was not a commandment.
It's not a sense of humor. I mean, it's a legitimate question.
Sure.
Chopping in the mafia. I think it's the Japanese mafia. The sign of obedience is that you chop off one digit of your one
right. I understand
joint
that.
Of your finger.
I assume,
and I see this as a sort of similar symbolic gesture.
Right. I assume you're not circumcised, so maybe you're not familiar with what I am circumcised because I come from a Jewish family. It happens to not be like removing a part of your finger because you lose the functionality where you don't lose functionality with circumcision. In fact, some would even argue it makes you. I don't even want to get into this, but. In any event,
I was about to say the details
like support. How does that support your argument?
What he's saying is that God's creation of the male penis was flawed, in that you need to remove that little clip there, and so that you can improve on God's creation.
Well, actually, no. That shows a deliberate. If you take it seriously, which I know you're not, but if you take it seriously, what it shows is that God anticipated that He would have to give man a sign that the removal of the flesh. In some sense, which I think the New Testament makes clear what that means. The Apostle Paul talks about that it's the flesh wages war against the spirit. And as a Christian, I believe there's a distinction between my body and my soul. I'm a dualist. I suppose you're not. So the idea that in the most sensitive region of the man that there is something to be removed is sort of pictorial of in the most sensitive integral part of us, something needs to be removed for us to relate to God. So, as Thunderfoot pointed out, no, it's not literal. It's not by being circumcised, you don't become closer to God automatically. God obviously designed people with two eyes. I mean, why didn't people gouge just one of their eyes out? That's a good question because you need your eyes, and that doesn't. Your eye isn't the integral reproductive sensitive thing.
No, the testes is the reproductive bit.
I understand that. But removing a testicle would then make you unreproductive.
You can remove one testicle with no problem.
I understand that, but it's better to have two. The circumcision is a it's not like removing a finger. You don't lose anything by being circumcised. Is my point.
Thunderfoot, or excuse me, not Thunderfoot. venomfangx. I just had some questions because I know you blocked me along with probably like 20,000 other people, and I mean no disrespect against you, and I have no beef with you or anything like that. I know my voice may have been raised, but I really don't have any problems with you personally. I just want to make that clear. But this is just how I debate. But I have a question for you concerning, because I've noticed that your videos have changed since you've come back, since you've been resurrected, so to speak. And I noticed that your theology seems to have become a little bit more consistent in some ways. Okay.
All right.
But the one thing I don't understand is your soteriology, your view of your God's, for instance, how do you deal with verses like John 6:44 and verse 65? How do you deal with Ephesians 2:8?
Are you talking about election versus how does God elect some but hold people accountable for not being elect?
I'm asking how you deal with that.
Apostolic succession.
I'm going to leave you to discuss that. I was never big on Aesop's fables myself, so.
I remember listening earlier, just like an hour ago, that you guys had brought up how can God hold unbelievers accountable when it says that no one comes to God unless God Himself does the work and draws them. Is that what we're talking about?
I'm asking you what.
I'm sorry if I can just pause you there for a moment, because I made a comment some time ago when I said that, in my view, a discourse about the intricacies of the Bible and quoting chapters and verses at each other is utterly irrelevant unless you get off first base. And first base is proving that it's actually the Word of God. I've been away. Have we actually managed to overcome that hurdle?
No, we haven't. I agree.
Well, why
with
are we wasting our time talking about the Bible unless you can prove the Bible is the Word of God?
I suppose because he's trying to show that it's internally inconsistent by showing that it teaches election, but also and predestination versus God condemning those who are not.
Let me ask you weren't in the call, Sean, when I asked this point.
Okay.
Presume your particular favourite version of the Bible is the King James version, yeah?
No, actually.
Which one is it?
I'm using the ESV right now.
Right. And can you talk me through the evolution of that Bible?
That's a funny choice of words, but basically...
It's not, actually. It's a very good choice of words.
Fair enough. The translations, obviously the Bible is not written in English. I think we all know that.
Yeah.
So we need it translated into English.
You say that in Texas, and you're going to have trouble, buddy.
Fair enough. But basically, yes, I can't read Hebrew or Greek as fluently as I ought.
So the Bible has evolved.
No, the original manuscripts.
Are you saying the original is what you're reading is exact copy of or exact translation of original works?
Not at all. I am not. No.
And if you were going to say that, I would ask you which the original works are.
And the interpretations that you use associated with that, the interpretations, as I mentioned before, where in the Middle Ages the serpent of the garden was always rendered as a female. Do you take the current interpretation, popular today, that the serpent was actually Satan in disguise?
Well,
what I'm curious about, Sean, is this. If your God was so great that he could design DNA, why couldn't he write a better book?
Wait, yeah, and
I
what
think
did
the
you
book's
say?
just fine.
How did you answer my question?
It says in Revelation that the serpent is Satan.
No, it doesn't. It says in Revelations 9, it says Satan, that old serpent, does not say that it was the same serpent that was in the Garden of Eden.
Back to talking about the details of the book, which we have no reason to believe is the Word of God. Why are we wasting our time on this?
I got to agree with DPR on that. I think we did get off track here.
That's fine, and I'd like to continue with whatever DPR Jones wants. But Aaron, if I could just suggest, there are other places in the Bible that hint, for example, in Ezekiel, where it talks about the anointed cherub in the Garden of Eden until iniquity was found in him, as well as Jesus' statements about him being the deceiver who deceived Adam and Eve and being a murderer from the beginning, all that sort of stuff. You put that together and it makes a pretty strong case for...
Sean, I'm not interested.
I know you're not interested in the story.
Rawlings was inspired when she wrote the Harry Potter book. She told me that she was inspired, and therefore everything in it is true. There's as much validity, therefore, in the existence of Hogwarts as there is in your God. Unless you get off the first...
I find that a very naive and
well, of course
argument.
you do, because you're just too deluded.
I'm sorry you feel that way.
Prove that your book is the Word of God, and until you do that, quoting passages at me from it is an utter waste of time.
I disagree.
Yeah,
how can you prove a
you're
text
talking
is
about, you're talking about the serpent of the garden was supposed to be Satan, right? And then you lump together all of these other things. You connect these little dots that aren't actually connected. I mean, like when you're talking about Isaiah, talking about Lucifer and
I didn't mention that.
What?
I didn't mention Isaiah.
Go on chapter and verse rather than the content of the book as a whole.
In the Bible is a conglomeration of multiple characters. You had the actual Satan, who was advisor to King El, and then you have the Baal, and it was another embodiment of the Satan character. They kind of culminated into this, and then you had Hillel ben Shahar, son of the twin brothers Shahar and Shalim, the dawn and the dusk, and they in turn were the sons of El. And this was stated in the astrology of the time, where Lucifer's point, the light bearer Hillel was played by Venus, and his father was the moon, and of course the rising sun was El. And when you have Isaiah who's ridiculing the Babylonian astrology of the time, you misinterpreted that and put that as part of your Satan character in much the same way as you've drawn these other little connected dots to things that were never actually connected, to assume that character that you've manufactured out of nothing was also the snake character, when the snake character was actually taken from the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it was only a snake.
Yep.
Aaron, if I could make a comment on all that, that's all well and good, but let's just say that the Bible is true and that the Garden of Eden situation did happen. Hold on.
Why should we just say the Bible is true? This is my point. Let's get back to that.
Because there's another possibility of what's going on here. If there is,
it's right. I can't pretend it's right. You could just as well
pretend it's wrong either.
If you want to just say, for sake of argument, that Aesop's fables is true, okay, we'll just for the conversation that Aesop's fables is true. If that's the context you're talking about, go ahead and make your point. But I cannot pretend that the Bible is right about anything.
Fine, I will allow you to
on many points.
Well, all I'm trying to say is, if this actually happened, all I'm saying is, if it actually happened, it's a hypothetical. If there was actually an Adam and Eve and actually a serpent talking to them in the garden.
We already know that we had multiple cultures around the world before the Tower of Babel. We already know who built the tower.
You made that point. I heard you. Thank you.
There it is, and all of that. I just want to be clear on that. There's absolutely no chance that the stories in the Bible, in Genesis particular, are true the way they are accounted. Just so we're clear on that. Now,
I understand you believe that.
I'll pretend otherwise so that you can make your point.
Thank you. If the Garden of Eden situation actually happened and there was an Adam and Eve, even though you don't believe it's possible, and even though all those points you made, these stories would have been passed down to a lot of people. People would have been talking about Adam and Eve or Adam and Lilith and a serpent, whether it be male or female, and that would have been passed down and retold and reinterpreted in many cultures throughout the world.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me.
Not many cultures. Not many cultures.
Whatever. Many people, groups, many different areas, whatever, however you want to say it.
Only in one area.
One area, that's fine.
Okay.
Which I think, the Bible is clear that that's where the dawn of man was in the Mesopotamian region.
It's wrong about that too, but we'll go ahead.
Yeah, I think we came out of Africa, Sean, but again, you don't accept evolution, so you wouldn't understand that.
Correct. I guess I would not.
Okay, so what you got here, Sean, is the stories that you're fighting so hard for. They all have either a basis in fact, as both the Flood and the Tower of Babel do, or they have a basis in earlier mythology, and that's the case for the Adam and Eve story. The Adam and Eve story actually come from a handful of different tales that are unrelated, except for the fact that they were conceived 1,000 years earlier than the Genesis counts that you're familiar with.
And Aaron, what I'm asking you to...
And they were written by the very grandfathers of the biblical authors. So
I understand
the original versions of these stories were not the Adam and Eve that you know today.
I understand that, Aaron, and I appreciate that. What I'm trying to tell you is that the Garden of Eden situation, as we have it recorded in the Bible today, was not given. Perhaps it was, or perhaps not. I can't be certain, but it was not codified until Moses, which was, I agree with you.
Moses didn't exist. Moses was a conglomeration of 4 different characters. One of them Meses, one of them Sargon, one of them the pharaoh Sennacherib, and I forget what the 4th one is. But we have other characters, including a pharaoh who lived centuries earlier than the time estimated for Moses, and this pharaoh is on the Red Sea and parts the Red Sea with his magic powers just because one of his maidens had dropped a turquoise ring off of it. Now, that was a very popular story, and it was retold many times, and then it was eventually attributed to Moses. And you have the same story for Moses being set afloat, and all the kingdoms are trying to kill the 2-year-old for who's going to overthrow the king. You have that same story reoccurring in the Bible, but also pre-occurring in other mythos, like Dionysus, for example. So all of these stories are interrelated. They just change the names of the characters in many cases. Like, for example, your Garden of Eden. Much earlier, 1,000 years earlier than anybody had ever heard of your Adam, you had very similar stories, except that all the important details on which you base your salvation did not exist. You had, for example, Enki, who traverses in the sacred garden of Inanna. He eats therein several fruit. Now, because it's a forbidden garden, then all the fruit therein is forbidden. Ninhursag catches him in the garden and curses him, and he falls. The immortal falls. Then she decides to forgive him and bears 7 daughters to cure the 7 wounds to his body, one of them being Ninti, the daughter born of the rib, for she was born to close the wound to his side. You just take the language out of the older mythos and conglomerate it together until you get this new story. But it's still a story. It's a fable.
I've been looking up the key words that you've been dropping, and I can't find any sources that agree with what you're telling me.
Then
are you saying that Owen is not accurate in what he said?
I am saying that, yes.
Okay.
Okay, but as I said, I can back up what I say.
I would be interested in seeing your sources.
And I would first refer you to the Library of Ashurbanipal. And
if I knew how to spell that, I would look it up.
Okay, and to the Epic of Gilgamesh.
I know the Epic of Gilgamesh. I've read it.
Okay, so you've happened. Is it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of Enki and Inti?
I don't know. I read that 5 years ago for English class.
No, that may be in another one. Now, the one from Gilgamesh is the one where you have Lilith, who's in the garden, and it's Gilgamesh, not Yahweh, who's walking around the garden.
Right, but that does nothing to challenge what I'm telling you. In fact, I think it supports it.
So the fact that your story is based on earlier stories in which all the important details that you now rest didn't exist, which disproves your entire worldview, supports your story.
Clearly, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, well, then what are you saying?
What I'm saying is these events actually took place in history. They were passed down. Not. Have you ever... Okay, you've seen Lord of the Rings, I assume. I'm just going to make an analogy.
Yes, but I just want to be clear. I don't believe that there was ever...
I know you don't. I understand you don't believe.
Okay, and I don't believe that Gilgamesh ever drove Lilith out of the garden along with a snake.
I understand that. Yep, I understand that.
These are fables.
I understand that. I'm not... I totally get what you're saying.
Genesis 1 obviously came from a composite of the Epic of Atrahasis and the and Enuma Elish.
And yet it...
So
okay, I understand what you're saying. Now, if I could kindly make what I'd like to say. Okay. I totally get you're an evolutionist. I totally get you don't believe any of the writings of religion or mythology or anything you deem that does not fit the evolution theory.
Sean, I hesitate to interrupt you. I will let you carry on, but I think that's a slightly disingenuous representation of our position.
Yeah,
there are aspects of the Bible that are accurate. What we're saying is that it is not the word of God, and you have no chance of proving that it's the word of God.
I totally understand that.
All right, okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. Aaron, let him continue. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sean.
The Lord of the Rings opens up by saying, we're introduced to this...
I don't believe the writings of any religion. It's that I don't believe anything on faith. I want to be sure on that.
Okay, that's fine. So Lord of the Rings opens up with this big battle, and the ring gets lost, and then Galadriel, I believe, played by...
Hey, that's the film! You heretic! That's the film, not the book.
All right, well, let's be fair. Let him carry on, Thunder.
All right, and so she makes the statement that what once was known and was historical fact fell into... People forgot it, and then it became myth, and then it became legend, and then... on and on. That's how Lord of the Rings opens up. So you have this historical event that takes place, and then in the present, when we catch up, it's only just whispers of this, that, and the other thing. It's all misunderstood and twisted, and it's just not as it was. And very few people remember how it actually was. And I think that's exactly. I think Tolkien, when he wrote Lord of the Rings, he was a Christian. He was making the whole Lord of the Rings is a Christian analogy or a parallel or whatever. He was
bullshit.
C.S. Lewis.
Absolute bullshit.
Do your research.
You do yours.
No, you do yours.
He's been.
Stop squabbling, children.
Tolkien, let's. I mean, you can talk about your interpretations of the Bible as much as you like, but Tolkien was quite clear on. Lord of the Rings was just a story. I mean, it was primarily that he was a language scholar and liked making up languages, and then he invented this world to go around those languages. Right? That's all it was. There was nothing to do with Christianity in there.
Regardless whether one fiction writer happened to be Christian in an all-Christian country at the time or not, it does not change the fact that what you're talking about is a collection of stories, and as I said, some of them were based on legends of fact, like the flood of Shuruppak in 2900, and the Tower of Babel. We know where it is and when it started and who worked on it and what really happened. But the stories that surrounded that...
And you trust those... I assume you're citing historical documents.
Yes, and archaeology, yes. I mean, the tower is essentially still there.
Okay, and what I'm saying is...
The flood of Shuruppak is still there.
Sure.
We know when it happened. We know that there's surrounding stories about it at the time. We found treasure...
How do you know that tower specifically,
Sean,
that event...
Sean, can I just give you a little bit of advice?
Sure.
If you're going to challenge Aaron about the content of what he's saying and whether it's factually correct or not, I would be very, very careful. And I would ask him specifically which bits you disagree with, because his knowledge is very good, and I've not caught him out too many times on being inaccurate. So to just say blanketly, well, I don't believe it, what are you looking at, historical documents, whatever. If you've got this is a specific point that he said that you do not agree with, then address it specifically and let him answer.